going to jump on with video as well when we start, or just stay with audio, which is either way is okay with me.
No, I'm gonna. Oh, okay. There we go. I'm a newbie to this technology stuff.
There we go. Okay. All right. So we're live now. Thank you all for being here. I'm Al McFarland. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Conversations with Al McFarland. For those that are new who haven't connected with us before, Conversations with Al McFarland is a byproduct of our weekly newspaper, Insight News. And with today's digital technology, like everybody else, we've kind of tried to reinvent ourselves, to see ourselves not so much as a weekly newspaper, but as a 24/7 newspaper or content curator. And that means that technology allows us to bring content to people we connect with daily, hourly, 24 hours. And we're sort of turning our process upside down to reflect the new capabilities brought on by the digital age. I'm pleased today to have a conversation about business, economics, about personal and professional growth around the challenges in the age of COVID-19. All of our worlds have been unsettled by this pandemic worldwide. I want to focus on the impact of COVID-19 on Black businesses in particular, and on individuals who are finding ways, needing ways to survive and move forward. I want to begin by asking one of my guests, the author of a program, How Black Businesses Can Survive COVID-19. It's actually a podcast presented by retired Harvard Business School professor, Stephen Rogers. Stephen Rogers set the table for this conversation. And as we go, I'll introduce the other guests who are on the screen and ask each of the guests to weigh in on the proposition of the impact of COVID-19 on our business and our lives.
Al, first of all, let me say thank you very much for inviting me to participate. I met you several months ago at my Uncle Ray's 100th birthday. For a Black man to live 100 years is something fascinating. But my Uncle Ray lives in Minnesota with his wife, my Aunt Lottie, and my beautiful and brilliant cousin Donna. And let me just say that it is absolutely imperative that Black-owned businesses survive this pandemic. And we have to participate in pursuing and procuring as much money as we possibly can. And the reason it is imperative that we survive and then we thrive afterwards is because there are approximately 2 million Black-owned businesses in the country, and those Black-owned businesses employ over 3 million Black people. And given our population of about 30 million Black people in the country, Black-owned businesses therefore employ almost over 10% of Black-owned businesses. And therefore, what we know that Black-owned companies are the largest private employers of Black people in America. And as we see throughout the country, here in Chicago, for example, my hometown, while Black people account for only 30% of the Black population of Chicago, we're accounting for over 70% of the Black deaths as a result of COVID-19. And if that same disproportionate impact hit Black-owned businesses, it will absolutely devastate our Black communities. We need Black-owned businesses to survive so that they can continue to employ Black people, so that they can continue to provide products and services to Black people. And one of my recommendations is that, and I'll close it with this, is that we absolutely must participate in the federal government's payroll protection plan program, where the federal government is giving money to businesses that are 500 employees or less, and they're giving them money that is in the form of a loan that can be converted to a grant. And Al, this is money that can, the maximum amount of money that can be given is $10 million. I've said on podcasts that this is money that we must get because 75% of it, if we use 75% of it for payroll over an 8-week period, Al, it converts into a loan. Black people have never had money given like this by the federal government to us. The federal government has never done anything like this that has included Black people. We must actually apply for this money. We're entitled to it. And Al, I'll conclude with this. it is the easiest application I've ever seen in my life in terms of the availability of capital. It has not required any credit checks. There is no personal guarantees to be given. There are no financial statements that are be submitted. This is, as I title it, easy peasy application money that we are entitled to, desperately need to get it.
That's great. Listen, let me ask the panelists here to, if you're not speaking, mute your mic so we have bandwidth and don't have you know, our voices warbled. Let me jump to you, Aaron Horn McKinney. Aaron McKinney is a futurist, a technologist, a tech serial entrepreneur, and has particularly been a force in promoting women women in business, but business in general for our community. And Aaron, let me have you jump in here and turn your mic on now, and just respond to the challenge and the opportunity shared by Professor Rogers.
Absolutely. So thank you for having me. So I am, as Al mentioned, a serial tech entrepreneur and entrepreneur in general, and very much an activist, an advocate for minority participation in the innovation economy, specifically around the Black community, hence the Wakanda virtual background. That you'll see, because one of the things that I'm really big about in my work as a tech founder, as someone who has worked in tech policy in the nation's capital and internationally, and also as the founder of the global membership organization, Black Female Founders, which is an organization for women-led tech startups and female tech leaders throughout the Black diaspora, has really been about how do we get increase our participation and pivot during to create generational wealth in our community, not just in the time of COVID, although what I will say is that this time has actually highlighted a lot of the gaps that currently exist. In my policy work that I've been doing for more than a decade, it has been about closing the digital divide, which we're of course seeing the impacts of that, of having a lot of our children unable to participate in school right now, and a number of or receive healthcare in our community and things like that, for those who do not have the systems in place to have telemedicine and so forth. But it's also about, at the end of the day, ownership issues and also employment issues. There's so many individuals in our community who are not able to participate right now and work and provide for their families because they are not in jobs or do not own a business that is tech enabled or have the skills to participate. So kind of speaking to kind of these call to actions, I listened to just a couple of things that I want to mention. I have been on a number of national conversations and roundtables, everything from the White House to Black leaders around the country around these issues. And quite frankly, it saddens me that our community is still being left behind even at this time at such a considerable level. And this is probably, to be honest, worse than my fears, in that, kind of being a town crier for a very long time around this. But what I will say that really warms my heart and makes me feel really positive is that myself, along with a number of Black entrepreneurial ecosystem leaders, have come together and are in the process of really drafting some demands specific to what our community needs at this time, and just really in general, right? Because this isn't even, it's not just what's happening right now, but it's also what will be happening post the pandemic, because our new normal will be taking place, and it is, and will we be ready? And it's really specific about the economic development issues around ownership, education, workforce development, and so forth.
We bring Earl Johnson in. Earl, my microphone host.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay, yeah. You work about people taking action on their own behalf in their own agency to move forward. And how does this challenge and the clarity that the COVID-19 experience is bringing to the pervasive disparities, how does it show up in how you can advise, assist people in developing their personal strategies for survival and moving beyond survival, growth and prosperity.
Right, right. I think what this situation has done in my world is that it allowed me to have a conversation with individuals about getting back to the basics around saving and preparing yourself, because so many, they could be personal situations that a disruption in income, losing a job, losing a family member, where you don't have the right insurance protection, you don't have disability protection, you don't have an emergency fund or some type of savings for an opportunity in the future. I mean, we were told years ago that it's always good to try to save, pay yourself first, have a certain amount of income put away for the future. And, one of the things that I share with my clients is that, what we're going to be concerned about is your next 20 years. In the last 20 years, so many things happened to you. There weren't the right preparation in place. So now, what this COVID thing has done is it almost gives us an opportunity to realize the fear that we've always had. We didn't know it was coming in the form of a pandemic, but not being prepared for that small emergency. They give statistics all the time about how many people, how much money people have put away for retirement. Or people don't have enough money to handle maybe a $400 emergency. Now is the time to start, preparing yourself a little bit better and saying, well, I'm going to put away 5%. I'm going to put away 10%. I'm going to put away 15, 20. My goal is to try to obviously not disrupt a person's lifestyle. If they love watching HBO, I don't tell a person to turn off HBO to save money because we're worried about the future. There's other opportunities in which they can save. And a lot of that is being educated about money, saving money on car insurance, saving money on property insurance. There's so many other ways that financially, you don't necessarily have to pinch a penny. You just got to identify where your money is going. So getting a snapshot, go ahead.
Take a minute and describe your business, give the name of your business, and want to make sure that in the course of this conversation, each of us lets the viewers and listeners know who we are, where we are, because we want you to do business with each other.
Good. No, I appreciate that. I'm an investment advisor with wealth manager with Evergreen Capital Management. Evergreen Capital Management is a firm that was started by a Black man in 1989. He's my partner. We have other advisors in Chicago and the Atlanta area as well. And, our goal is, in dealing with people like myself, a lot of these people in this business, they look for people with $250,000, $500,000, $1 million to invest. I mean, yeah, that's fine and dandy if you want to build a business that way. But at the end of the day, my goal is to try to help people make the best decisions with their money. So trying to educate folks, if you can't be a client of mine, I spend a lot of time with people in our community trying to educate them around, how do you get to the point where you're living on 60% of what you make and you're putting away 40%, towards some sort of savings or some kind of education fund or, something to benefit your family in the future and ultimately get us in a position where we can create multi-generational wealth. So we spend a lot of time with our clients in those conversations.
Magic words, Aaron, you use those words, intergenerational wealth. Let's focus on that. And Professor Rogers, if you would, how do we take the daunting challenges in front of us and find the silver linings? How do we become intentional in the execution of personal strategies that lead to intergenerational wealth? Aaron, first you, please.
Well, I think the way that we do that is, I believe in clustering, right? And clustering resources. Instead of everyone trying to do this on their own and build this solution on their own, there's so much power in working together. We see so many other communities that come together and support each other. I think part of that is even in our planning future-wise, I think that there is a call to action that needs to happen around rebuilding Black communities, right? And coming together and supporting each other and keeping those dollars in our communities. Secondarily, it comes to education. I think that we need to start educating our community and every single business that we have. And it doesn't matter if it is, you know, every barbershop and beauty salon to barbecue restaurant to our large scale and big businesses, making sure that they're tech enabled and participating in the innovation economy in different ways. And so I think we can, when we empower ourselves with that knowledge, and then it also is in the education of our future generations around the actual skill sets that they will need to be employed or to be employers in the future. Because the problem is that unfortunately we are in situations that we have antiquated school systems that are teaching antiquated information. And so what it is doing is that we're putting out students that are not prepared, right? And how do we do all of that? How do we have that education happen at the same time that doesn't financially continue to disable us? And then I think even at the point that was just made around the financial knowledge, right? I think we are seeing more and more the importance of financial literacy in our communities and using our economic power collectively to make a difference. And I think when we can start to have some real leadership around those issues in a way and come together, and I think even just create, let's just use the Twin Cities as an example and create some national and really international best practices, we will see a difference. We will see our own Wakanda in our communities.
Professor Rogers, go ahead.
First of all, let me challenge everybody who's on this panel. If you are the owner of a company or the leader of a not-for-profit, I ask all of you, have you applied for the PPP grant? Everybody is eligible to get that. And so I would implore every one of you to apply for that money. And if a friend of mine reaches out to me today and wants to talk, the first question I ask is, did you apply for the money? And if you haven't applied for the money and you're Black, then we don't need to talk anymore until you apply. Because this is money that is at the lowest cost of capital that Black people have ever seen. And it is at and it touches on, Al, your question about Black wealth. Mm-hmm. What we know from research that 80% of the people in this country who are wealthy, 80% of them gain their wealth by being associated with entrepreneurship, by either being an entrepreneur or investing in entrepreneurs. We know the other 20%, Al, gain their wealth the old-fashioned way. They inherited it, okay? And not many Black folks are going to be inheriting capital because of our history of 246 years of free labor that we've given, plus 100 years of Jim Crow where we were grossly underpaid. So wealth for us has to come through entrepreneurship. And as I stated to you earlier, 2 million people, Black people in the country are entrepreneurs. The problem that we have as entrepreneurs is that 1.8 million of those are sole proprietors. And as sole proprietors, that doesn't mean you don't have any employees. But most sole proprietors do not have any employees, Al. Mm-hmm. And we need those sole proprietors. We need those businesses to grow. If we're going to talk, it's not just simply to entrepreneurs, we need Black entrepreneurs to at least have revenues, annual revenues of at least $250,000. Because research shows that's the threshold for profitability. So the fastest growing category of Black entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs, 94% of those Black companies.
I'm getting sound crunched, Stephen.
Black companies.
Is anybody else having difficulty hearing
we
Stephen?
Need those.
So I don't know what it is, but see, let's say that again. We're losing your sound for a second, but
I found if I take the video off, maybe it'll get better.
Try that. Let's try it. Sure.
Okay. Right. But as I was saying, we need those Black-owned companies to grow to at least $250,000 of revenue. And growth does not happen just simply out of passion. We need people to gain skills so that they can grow their firms. And the skills that we really would like them to focus on are finance skills. I'm a finance professor. I taught entrepreneurial finance at Harvard Business School. It is not brain surgery. It is something that everybody can master. We need to stereotype that Black people are afraid of the numbers. Black people can master the numbers so that we can get these companies to grow to $250,000 in revenue and get to the point where true wealth can be built. Profitability has to be a part of the formula. So I implore everybody to talk about wealth creation for Black people via entrepreneurship. It has to first start with us creating companies that are sizable enough to be profitable, create jobs for other people, and then have wealth to transfer to other people.
I want to say in response to your challenge, my company did apply for the PPP and received PPP loan funding early on. And so I want to tell you that I'm following the prescription that you've made. And secondly, I've applied for EIDL, it's called, I think. And you might describe, Stephen Rogers, what EIDL is. It's also good money. It's real good money. Take a minute, if you would, and talk about what EIDL is.
It's great money.
And how people should get that as well.
Yeah. EIDL is an emergency funding that is provided by the federal government. It, like the PPP program, it is an SBA-backed program where they will give you X amount of dollars up front as a grant and then the balance as a loan. And so EIDL is a program that one should apply to. It's the same as they apply to PPP. It is a separate SBA-backed program. And again, oftentimes people will get $10,000 grant and then a $50,000 loan. And that loan is at an interest rate of probably about 3 to 5%, which is an outstanding low cost of capital. If you can get anything that is below 5% interest, it is outstanding 5% because prime is the interest rate that lenders give their best clients. So I think prime is around 5%. So if you get a loan at 5% or less, that is outstanding in terms of cost of capital. So everybody should apply to at least those two programs that Al mentioned, PPP and EDL. And I don't know, I didn't get a response from Aaron. I didn't get a response from the brother who was just on talking about and regaling about the businesses that he founded with his Black partner. But again, I'm curious to know, did everybody apply to PPP? If you didn't, please apply. Everybody is eligible for this money if you have a business.
So actually my companies, I'm in several companies and several of them have applied for it. And the first round, one was denied and they're in the process of the second round. But and if I can, and not to challenge, but ask you to follow up on, is because what a lot of people don't realize as self-employed individuals, their eligibility for other funds. I know it's different state to state, but maybe you could speak to that and provide some insight on that as well, because a lot of people think that they're not eligible.
Well, let me first of all say this. You should not be denied. If you were denied, other than the reason being that you had a company that's 500 employees or greater, then that's one of the criteria. The only other reason why you should be denied, Aaron, is if you have defaulted on a federal loan over the last 7 years. Barring that, you are eligible to get that money and you should reapply to another financial institution. That is your money, you're entitled to it, and you can apply to several different financial institutions. And in terms of being self-employed, being a sole proprietor, you are eligible. All you have to do if you're self-employed is you have to submit a Schedule C. A Schedule C is just simply for the self-employed, a profit and loss statement that you would have to submit to the IRS. But Schedule C is where
Lost your sound again.
Your company has made as a self-employed individual. You go to line 31, you take line 31, you divide it by 12 because the PPP program says they will give you 2 times your 2019 average monthly payroll. And so your Schedule C will show what your annual profit was. You take that annual profit, which is line 31, you divide it by 12. That gives you your monthly average payroll for 2019, and you multiply that times 2.5. And if you multiply by 2.5, the result that you get is the amount of loan that you qualify for. So, Aaron, thanks for bringing it up and asking me to implore people who are self-employed, who are sole proprietors to apply. There are 1.8 million Black folks who have fallen into that category, Aaron. And in my opinion, my estimation, Black people should get up to as little as $33 billion out of that $670 billion that was allocated by the federal government in the first $100, which was
We're losing your audio again.
and a lot of business got money. The second was April 27th, and that was $320 billion.
Listen, let's broaden the conversation
The
a little
second
bit.
tranche was,
Yeah, let me come back to you, Stephen, because the sound is wobbling again.
I
wanted.
I'm in a high rise, so maybe that's what.
Okay. Could be. So you know what? Two things, because I want to bring in Al Flowers and Jeff Washburn into the conversation, but I want to preface it with sort of a personal story that relates to Earl's advice about how we become personally aware and be serious about our existence and be planful. Because I can tell you, I'm 72 now, but I remember being 22. And one of the guys who's a business leader in the community had an insurance company and approached me saying, Al, what are you going to do for life insurance? At 22, I'd already bought my first house and was working for a big corporation. I was doing pretty good. On my second, big career in corporate. And, but I had the attitude that I was young and invincible. And I couldn't understand why I needed insurance. So I kind of scoffed at the guy and laughed at him. Insurance is for weak people who are not confident about their future. Boy, was I stupid, and I'm looking back and kicking myself in the butt every day for not having heeded the counsel of that professional. So my question, Earl, and all of the panelists, how do we change the culture? How do we educate, inform, and provide the tools of understanding about wealth and the value of wealth? We've all also had this thing in our community where I come out of a Pentecostal church background, and the drumbeat was the love of money is the root of all evil, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's this ambivalence about doing well and being well and making money. Everybody wants to make money on the one hand, but you also have this counterbalancing stream of thought that's questioning you and your motive if you do well. So it creates immobilization, I think. So just respond to that in general. Then I want to bring in, you use the word cluster, Aaron. And I think what Jeff Washburn and Al Flowers are doing operates in that arena. How do we cluster wealth creation opportunity in the community? And finally, when I get to Al Flowers, you work with a lot of neighborhood organizations. And the question should be raised by you and by me, how many of our community-based organizations have applied for PPP? And are these organizations equally eligible for PPP funding? So let me go to Earl first, and I'll go around the horn here. Earl.
I'm sorry, can I jump in really quickly to add to what you're saying to Earl? Because one of the things that you mentioned is, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge, is that entrepreneurship has not always been, nor does it continue to be, a positive and reinforced path in our community. Other communities support people when they're becoming entrepreneurs. In our community, unfortunately, what happens a lot is it's kind of almost looked at you as being lazy and not wanting to get a job. So I just want to put that in there and speak to that, as you're talking, Earl, around the perception of it not being considered a real trusted and respected avenue of opportunity in our community.
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing it for 20 years, and I'm faced with that challenge. It seems like every day. You know, you deal with a community that knows you and knows what you do. And my partner and I, we kind of laugh about it because you'll see somebody you hadn't seen in a while, and they ask you, "You still doing that insurance investment thing?" As if I'm going to go away. I mean, this is my livelihood. You know, I support clients and have built a business around that. So I do understand the challenge that, you know, and it's part of us getting educated and being exposed to what it's like to be an entrepreneur. And, you know, part of that is, you know, getting us, you know, if you can't hire employees, get interns, you know, get that apprentice to, you know, see what it is you do. I mean, there's not too many guys that do what I do in my community, and certainly not Black. So, you know, certainly there's, you know, and like yourself, Aaron, when you talk about technology, I mean, technology itself is something that people don't really understand. And how do you make money from it is another thing they don't understand. So it's a little difficult to get that traction, you know, and help grow around that. But to address Al's point, when he talked about, you know, not having that insurance policy, you know, there's a couple of ways that I look at it. You know, certainly it's an asset, and assets gives us an opportunity to leverage, to eventually use our assets to build a business. Whether we walk into a bank and seek a loan, they want collateral. They want to know that you got assets and the ability to, you know, follow through if they do loan you money. But, you know, as it relates from a community standpoint, when you get insurance or you have assets, if you have something, it's really about the people you care about. I mean, family always wants us to help when they fall, but do they have protections in place when they do fall? Insurance is a protection, an investment is a protection, a job is a protection because it helps you provide and put food on your table. But you know, if you'd have bought that insurance policy, Al, and it would have grown, you know, you would have had an asset that you can leverage either to spend that money, or if you passed away, it would give you an opportunity to help the people you care about. So it's really, my conversation around that is, you know, when Mr. Smith passes away, would you rather me to walk in with one hand with a check for $10,000 in it, or another check for $250,000 for his insurance policy? I think Mr. Smith's going to take that $250,000. So, you know, it's just part of us planning and getting more educated about it.
Jeff Washburn, jump in here. Tell people what the City of Lakes Community Land Trust is. You got a way to focus on preserving and growing wealth in our community. The process has been around. I think Black people pioneered in the land trust movement nationwide, but then it comes back to us sometimes as something white people do and not Black people. You are being intentional in connecting with and sharing the story, the history, the legacy, and the opportunity with people around you. And I know that you're in partnership with my colleague, Al Flowers. Let me introduce Al Flowers. I call him the field marshal for the movement in Minnesota. Flowers is a voice that does not stop and will not be stopped in the advocacy for civil and human rights for Black people and people of color and everybody. So first of all, Jeff Washburn, thank you for being here. City of Lakes Community Land Trust, what's the proposition?
Thank you, Al. Thanks for having me on the show. So our organization is primarily an long-term affordable home ownership organization where historically over the last 17, 18 years, we've now helped close to 400 households purchase homes in the city of Minneapolis. And what we do is essentially bridge the difference between what a household can get a mortgage for and the cost of the property. Our share, or that investment we make in the property, is typically tied to the title of the land. And the reason we do that is so that if and when the household ever goes to sell, we're able to take our investment and pass it on to another low-income household. If there's a change in value of the property, the homeowner and the organization share in that change. Our share stays with the property to keep it affordable over time for another low-income household. I just take the opportunity in the talk about business. I know you're aware of my colleague who we brought on last year, one by the name of Dominique Jones. About a year ago, our organization took on the opportunity to expand what we had been doing in the residential space to the commercial space. So we hired Dominique, and she's leading a really strong advisory board to create a commercial land trust with a very similar philosophy. A lot of the details are still getting worked out, but I think as we're heavily in the COVID crisis, I think realizing that, boy, I wish we had done this 5 years ago, because I think in many ways the commercial space is going to be hurt. Small entrepreneurs are going to be hurt way worse than a lot of residential homeowners, at least early on. And to have that stability is really important for the community. Moving forward, I do think, unfortunately, there'll be some opportunities for the commercial land trust to step up, take advantage of some opportunities to create community space. The focus, very purposeful focus of the commercial land trust, as you're probably well aware, is serving community of color, small business owners, and some intentionality around focusing our efforts in North Minneapolis, which I'm really proud of the direction that initiative is going. As it relates to Mr. Flowers here, and we came on your show last year, and we were talking a little bit about our aspirations of essentially focusing a good chunk of our work on creating a African American community land trust, owned by, with a focus of even assisting more households of color than what our organization has been able to do. So we're working with On the Ground Strategies and Al, the faith communities and the Urban League to have an intentional program that targets African American households, low income households, create a path into home ownership. And then once we're kind of pegging at about 20 units. Once we get to that level, actually take those assets that we've helped in this initiative and spin them off to a newly created entity, passing those along so that the ownership of those assets is held by an African American community land trust.
Has your company and have other agencies that you are aware of applied for PPP?
Yes. Sorry, forgot to answer that question. We as well applied early on and were successful. I know of a number of other nonprofits kind of in this community development space that did not get in on that first, what I'll call first round. What I've understood is that
because they didn't apply or applied and didn't.
They did not apply quick enough, and or their partner bank just wasn't getting in their application as quickly as others. So missed the first round. As I understand, they're anticipating, if they haven't already received, will be receiving funds from what I'll call that second round or subsequent rounds.
Al Flowers, are you hearing that neighborhood organizations, unmute your mic, Al, because you're muted for us right now. Oh, there we go. Are you hearing that whether community organizations are applying for PPP funding? Do you know?
No, excuse me. Thank you, Al. No, they some are applying for the small business loan, but as I sit here, I'm getting educated myself about what's going on and what they can do, and so I'll be pushing that message out when I do my radio show. So I'm kind of getting educated on this conversation about what's going on, trying to create wealth in our community. So no, I haven't did this. I'm getting information now about the technology. I'm listening, and whatever I can do on part to get that message out on the platforms that I have, I would absolutely do it. But if I can speak on this land, what we're talking about is housing in perpetuity, the affordable home ownership in perpetuity, working with the land trust. And I think that we lost a lot of wealth in the housing crash when the market crashed on the housing in the Black community. We lost a lot of our wealth over the last 30 years and continue to lose wealth now. And I think what we're talking about here, we're trying to get to that point where we'll have those business here in Minnesota. When we look at, we're last in in education, in housing, in wealth creation for our community. So what's happening here is real, but I think the housing, building wealth creation under the housing model, whether you want it the conventional way or this way of the land trust, and having our Black churches be a part of it, and building their power back, so they don't have to ask right now in this COVID world, Al, and to the rest of your guests. Our Black churches are the one that's feeding our seniors, our elders, our community, and that wasn't known before COVID. They were doing things before COVID, but now it's being exposed that like everything else is being exposed, our conditions with this COVID. So with the land trust, us working on the land trust with the Black churches in the community, working together along with the Urban League, working, this is just one way of affordable home ownership. And then it can help, the church can help lift up other community members, as Jeff said, that when once somebody else leaves that part and they go the conventional way, we'll have we'll bring somebody else in there. Because in Minnesota, you know, in Minneapolis in particular, the rental, we're 75, we in the 70s of rent. We don't own anything. We don't own anything, whether it's a land trust house or our own house. We don't own anything. We're paying rent right now. And so to get to where these guests are talking about, they're trying to help the business that's out there now that's probably don't know anything about this information of what you're saying that they have to do. So now I get to say that, hey, listen, it's this funds out. I would have been saying it. I'll be on every other day. I'm on the radio on Sunday. I would have been saying, hey, this is some of the ways, especially the barber shops and the salons. That's what we got. We don't own any of these other businesses, but the ones that own the barber shop don't have this information, what you're saying today. And I'm surely gonna be pushing that. But I just want to make sure that we talk about this land. This is a part of creating wealth in our community. Some people don't like it. You don't have to like it. But I know I would like to be in a land trust house by my church than to be paying rent to some landlord that don't care anything about me. So that's why this is a big deal. And I'm just excited about this conversation. That's why I don't usually be this quiet. And Brother Rogers, yeah, I say what's up, but what you said, you in my hometown, that's my hometown, Chicago too. So I just, this is information our community needs, and I thank Al for doing it, but I particularly thank Jeff Washburn in the city of Lake for putting up their capital, their collateral to try to build within our community and bringing and making us be one of the land trusts around the country. And it's going to be a big deal. And I hope y'all look up and listen, because we coming with it.
So,
can I add an innovative thought to that, to his point?
Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
You know, to what he's talking about the Black churches. I mean, one thing that, you know, I've started to realize, and I wish that there was a way to like there are pre-existing models that can be replicated in the Black community. So for example, related to churches, you know, in the Jewish community across the country, there are local Hebrew free loan funds that exist that give, and you don't have to be Jewish actually to take to participate, but oftentimes they'll give you, you know, $10,000 micro loans or whatever with no interest, right? And they do this, and they have literally in every community they have 100%. Everyone that I've researched has had 100% repayment on all of their loans, right? But it's a way that they have pulled together their money in the community and said, how can we help? And how can we not create, you know, any sort of predatory lending practices or so forth? And, you know, I'd love to challenge the Black churches in our community, and specifically in the Twin Cities. How can we replicate a model like that? And it doesn't have to be one church. It can be a collective, right, to do something like that, and instead of relying on other organizations to feed and serve our community.
Let me, Al, if I can, a couple things. I failed to say this when I described the PPP loan, first of all, and that is, it's a loan that converts into a grant. If it stays a loan because you spent less than 75% of your money on payroll, the percentage of the money that you actually spent on payroll remains a grant, and the balance is a loan. The loan is a 2-year loan now, and it's at 1% interest. And you don't make your first payment until 6 months from now. So 1%, Al, I've heard some Black people disappointingly say, well, I don't want a loan. Well, you know, 1% loan, Al, it's like you going to your little brother when you were a kid and say, give me $1 so I can buy a bag of potato chips. And he gives you $1, loans you $1, and you agree to give him $1 back plus a penny. So listen, there's no law cost of capital that's lower than that. In fact, you are better off, Al, using the money that you get from as a loan at 1%. You're better off using that money than taking and using your own money. Because if you took your own money out and you put it into a bank account, a savings account, you would get 3% interest off of that money. Whereas you can use somebody else's money out and it only costs you 1%. So this is money that is the lowest cost money that's ever been available to Black people. I say that this money is even almost better than the 40 acres and a mule. And the reason I say that, Al, is because the 40 acres and a mule, it really wasn't a mule, but it was the 40 acres that were promised to Black people, the freedmen, after the Freedmen's Act in 1865. That act, Al, said they're going to give 400,000 acres of land, take 400,000 acres of land from the white Confederates, who they were talking about hanging for treason. They're going to get 400,000 acres of land, and they're going to parcel it into 40 acres. Now, this is what people never heard, and that is those acreages was going to be sold to Black people, not given, sold to Black people at $1.25 an acre, Al. So that's why I've been able, that's why I've said, you know, it sounds somewhat hyperbolic, but this loan that's being available to Black people is better than anything that has ever been offered to Black people, not to white people. You know, our federal government gives grants to farmers, primarily white farmers, to the tune of about $16 billion of free capital a year. So something like this has never been offered for Black people to have, Al. And let me just close by saying this. We can't get out of this financial quagmire that we're in by ourselves. You can't, it's just no way on God's earth that you work for free for 246 years and you think you're just going to simply work hard and get out of this. We're owed reparations. And the reality is, in today's environment, Al, the average white family has a net worth of about $170,000. For the average Black family, it's $17,000. In Boston, Al, the average net worth of a Black family is $8. Is this because we're just poor savers? We don't work hard? Well, for 246 years, all of us had a job.
That's right.
But we never got paid. And so the whole notion of, and let me just say, 35% of the Black population has a negative net worth. We're a poor people. And we're not a poor people because of anything negative about us, but what was done to us. And it was done intentionally, not just by the private sector, but by the public sector as well, with enslavement, followed by redlining, followed by other things that were public policies that actually had the specific intent of putting us in the position we're in today. We're not bad people because we don't collaborate with each other. We're poor because everybody conspired to make us poor. And that's where we're in right now as a result of that. Therefore, the only way that we'll get out of this is the government has to help us. And it is not begging, it is not acting like a victim. We are victims. And when people who are victims, what happens is when they go to legal court, they usually get repents, okay, and reparations for that. So until we get what we deserve in terms of reparations, we're always going to be in a hole. Somebody said, research showed, if you stopped white people from making money right now, it would take Black people 250 years to gain the same amount of wealth that white people have today. So how do we get on this path to wealth? First of all, we have to work hard. We have to keep creating companies. We have to also get engaged in real estate. But Al, we got to get some reparations. I've done pretty well in my life, but the reality is, if my great-great-great-grandparents had not been discriminated against, I would be 10 times, 100 times wealthier than I am today. And I could use that money to infuse my Black community and create jobs for Black people in my community. So let's never get into the self-blaming game. I'm a race man. In the old school vernacular, I look at everything through the lens of how does it help the Black community and how can we improve the Black community? What I'll never do is I'll never blame the Black community for our predicament. We're where we are now because this was done to us intentionally. And once you've been abused, just like any person who gets abused, you engage in pathological behavior. You do things that are self-destructive, but that's blaming the victim in that instance. Mm-hmm. So I'm a strong advocate of wealth creation, but Al, the foundation of it has to be with reparations. It happened for Asian Americans. I watched the documentary on television yesterday for PBS. It happens with our Jewish friends over in Germany. Mm-hmm. It has happened for everybody, but never for us. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, it should have happened for us first.
This is a wonderful conversation, Steve. I am just so taken aback, thrilled to hear your comments and to add those to the knowledge, the wisdom being presented by the other members of the panel. One thing that stands out, one of the many things that stands out, is your statement that you figure out of the stimulus funding, $33 billion ought to be the least that Black people get. So the question is,
let me just tell you the reason why. And the reason why, last year, that's 5% of the money is what the SBA gave to Black-owned businesses. Therefore, if you take that 5% out and you apply it to 2020 to the $670 billion of the payroll protection money that has been allocated, 5% would give us $33 billion.
Principle is, how do we take that number, Al Flowers, and carry that in our minds and in our voice and talk about changing the narrative? Too often, and this is not blaming us, Steve, but it's acknowledging that we end up being our own worst critics. If we talk about money, talk about what we deserve and what we want. And one of the things that Al Flowers is known for is demanding that our interest be met as defined by us. And
God bless him.
Yeah, and so Al, it seems to me we're getting more marching orders here to go boldly to talk about fair share, how we articulate and actually say the number of what Minnesota, what Hennepin County, Ramsey County, what the city of Minneapolis, what the city of St. Paul, what these public institutions that we are owners of as citizens have to do, must do, and what we demand and expect them to do and work to make them do. So that's what I'm thinking and how we interpret Stephen Rogers' advice and direction here. Aaron, jump in. And what are your thoughts and what are your impressions here? And we're almost out of time, but go ahead.
Yeah, you could tell I was itching because I really wanted, I love Steve's comments, and what I wanted to ask him is what would be his call to action on reparations, because I'm with him. I absolutely agree that we need reparations, but what we have not been able to do is get our community on the same page about that ask. But I would, given his expertise, I would love to hear what he would say. If it was up to you, Steve, today, what would reparations look like?
Well, first of all, reparations wouldn't cost the country anything significant. Just like today, the country and the Federal Reserve is printing money so that we can get out of this. The Federal Reserve, and they did that in 2008 as well, they could do that again. So this is not something that would necessarily hurt the white taxpayers who would complain about it necessarily. This is something that can happen to us. I believe reparations should be given in terms of some financial, the amount I'm not specific about. But for those who are the descendants of Black American slaves, then a certain amount of capital should actually go to them. And I'm not one who talks about, well, you know, how are we going to dispense it and everything? I've never heard anybody talk about how we're going to share the money before they talk about getting the money. Get the money and make that part of the process. One of the things that happened in Chicago, in a town that I own a house in Evanston, it's a suburb with Northwestern, is the cannabis industry has passed in Illinois now, such that cannabis is legal. The city of Evanston has said all monies, all taxes that come from the cannabis industry goes to Black businesses in Evanston now as a form of reparations. I believe that that's one of the ways that that can happen, as well as, but more importantly, I believe the federal government owes this to us, and it can print money from the Federal Reserve to give that money to us. One could say, and I don't think this is enough though, Aaron, to say, let's look at what the value, the present value of 40 acres would be today, and we get that. I don't think that's enough, Aaron. And so the exact formula I haven't come up with, but I believe it should be actual hard cash. Some people say, well, we're gonna squander the money. So what? So what if we squander the money? That's the American way. Everybody has the right to do whatever they want to with their money. Some will be a knucklehead, some will not be a knucklehead. That same thing applies to the white population. We tend to think that we're the only group who has some of that problems, but the white population is so much larger than us that we give them more credit than they deserve, okay? But the reparations, I would say, in conclusion, Aaron, should be in the form of actual cash that gets dispensed to some of us. And I do not believe that the PP program that I'm imploring everybody to participate in, this is not reparations, because it's available to everybody. Reparations is solely for us.
I agree.
Hey,
and I think that to piggyback on that, I think it needs to be financial as well as it needs to be in the form of land ownership. From my perspective, without us giving up our citizenship, because what has been put forth before is that if you were given financial contribution then, or financial reparations, then you should give up your citizenship, you know, which to me is a crazy concept. But anyway, I just wanted to jump in because I really appreciate you.
Al Flowers, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get in because, man, they saying so much good stuff. But I wanted to go back on what Aaron said about what we are doing with land trusts, is bringing all the churches together, all the denominations, African American denominations together to work on this idea with the community, with on the ground strategy and the urban league to bring this to the community. So it'll be each, so they'll deal with their denomination, having individuals from each church send somebody in to find housing. And what when you talk about reparation, I don't want to leave no show where I don't talk about what we're doing in Minnesota and what Nick Muhammad and Black Civic and Thomas Berry and them, some young brothers is up here doing. And part of that is saying using reparation than saying repair. If we saying repair, and then I don't know what you're thinking, but we can, if we saying we repair some of the all this damage that has been done to the African American community, ADOS, over the years, of saying repair in housing, repairing in education, but we got to get on the same page. So the reparation talk is real here in Minnesota. I don't know who all fighting out there, but this is who I know has been talking to our community and saying what's up. And if there's some more people that anybody know that should be at that table, one of my big things is about coordinating and organizing big initiatives with our community. This land trust is one dealing with our public safety, because if we don't talk about our public safety, nobody will. The education, all of these things. So it's about building collaborations and talking about repair. I would wonder what Brother Rogers, is it Dr. Rogers or Brother Rogers? I said, what's up?
Good Steve, you're fine.
Yeah, but I'm saying about us bringing that collaboration together. I would love to get the ideal from Al, because changing our narrative is something that me and Al McFarland have been talking about for the last 3 years. We got to change the narrative because the institution does not trust African Americans like they do other minority groups. Other minority groups can go in and ask for what they want, what they need, whether you're Asian, whether you're Somali, whether you're Latino, whether you're Native. All those ethnic groups can go in. But when African Americans go in, the descendant of a slave, we have to be labeled under people of color. And how do we get out of that?
That's a whole nother show. I
That's
think
another show.
that's another show. It's a great question. It's a great way to end this conversation. This has been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful dialogue conversation. And I want to use this as a standard that we build on. Our intent is that every Wednesday at 1 o'clock, we're talking about wealth creation, about business, about innovation, about technology. And I want to invite anybody that's listening or watching on social media to like this, to share it, and to show up again next week, next Wednesday. We continue this conversation. My special thanks to all of my guests, Professor Stephen Rogers, a retired business finance professor at Harvard, resident of Chicago, and a friend of one of my best friends, one of my heroes, Ray Robinson, is a 100-year-old veteran who was one of the original Buffalo Soldiers, decorated many times during the invasion by Black soldiers. The regiment in Livorno, Italy, I think, was one of the battles he's talked about, that he earned merit for bravery. So to Ray and to you, Professor Rogers, thank you. Al Flowers, as always, we talk every day, several times a day. I want to applaud you publicly, as I do privately, for your tenacity, for the strength, and for the dedication you bring. Brother Earl Johnson, we just meeting, but I have enjoyed this moment with you and what we'll be doing together in the future. I'm going to invite you and me to stay connected, right? And let's use this platform and my other platforms to the degree that you're willing to keep spreading the message. Let's educate our people. And Aaron, good to meet you. We've got a lot of conversations going on, but once again, this shows how important it is that we talk. It's so important. Finally, Jeff, thank you. Davion, thank you for monitoring and writing about this. You can read reports on this conversation in Insight. If not in the Monday coming up, the following Monday, I believe we have as a lead story, I've got to confirm with you, Stephen Rogers, an article about you for next Monday's Insight News. I got to get some final permissions. We're doing that right now. But what you heard today should be our lead story for next Monday's Insight News. And we're working to make that happen. With that, thank everybody. Again, subscribe to us on YouTube, and share this out to your friends. Be here again next Wednesday at 1 o'clock. I'm Al McFarland with Conversations with Al McFarland. Thank you again. We'll see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks. And Stephen, I'm going to call you.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
And also, if you would, since everybody's on, please make my podcast available to everyone, because that podcast literally covers everything that I was talking about, PPP. The purpose of the podcast was to have a call of action to Black people to apply for this money. So please make it available.
Can you send that to the link to the chat room here?
I don't know how to do that. But
on the bottom of your screen, there's a chat button. And
in the meantime, can you just tell us what it is?
Yeah, tell us. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, Aaron's.
It's on Buzzsprouts, and it's Buzzsprouts is the location of it, or Black Enterprise. Actually, Black Enterprise picked it up as well. So it's on the Black Enterprise. If you go to the Black Enterprise site, it'll be the first article on the site.
Okay.
What's the name of your podcast?
I think it's called, my daughter gave it to me, I think it's Black Business Excellence on Buzzsprouts. And it's 10 different podcasts, and it's one that is just giving the basic information about PPP. And the second one is begging people almost to apply for it and refuting some of the myths that people have been putting out in the Black community about it being too complicated, and that's the reason why they didn't want to apply. So I decided, let me put something out there to take that myth away, as well as to fight some of the other reasons why people were claiming they didn't want to apply, which also included they didn't trust the government, which I said, you have the right not to trust the government given what they've done to us, but nevertheless, let's try to apply. And then the other reason people say, I don't want a loan. Well, this is the cheapest loan you're ever going to get in your life. This is cheaper than any credit card that people are going to use. And 80% of Black businesses use credit cards.
Yep. Listen,
so Aaron, you asked a short question. I give you a long dissertation answer.
I love it.
Aaron, you're the tech person on the call, so you're to help me make sure we get this information out, okay?
You know, I got you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Jeff, thanks. Davion, thanks. Alf, thanks. We'll see you all next Wednesday. Thanks a
All
lot.
right. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, Kelvin. There we go.